So this first reading is really about that truth that God is the God of second chances. We hear God renewing this covenant with Abraham. This is the second time that he speaks about this covenant blessing that's going to come through Abraham, through his son. And so today, we heard that several chapters before when Abraham is taken outside. There's this very mysterious covenant sacrifice where he takes these pieces of the animal and puts it on one side or the other, and the Lord just sort of mysteriously goes through that, and he says, look at the stars, so your descendants will be as numerous as those stars that are there. But then something happens between Genesis 15 and Genesis 17, and that's where there's this lapse of faith with Abraham, or Abram at that time, and Sarai. Because they're getting on in years. They were already old when they received this promise, but now they're starting to doubt it. And maybe we've had those experiences where, we've been strong with the Lord, and then we just start questioning, is the Lord really walking with me, or am I alone? We call this orphan spirit, this idea of the sense of, I'm alone. I don't have my Father with me right now. And that's in many ways what happens to Abram and to Sarai. And they say, this is not going to happen. We're not going to have a child through Sarai, through Sarah. We need to take matters into our own hands. And they come up with this practice that was in Egypt, and they take Sarai's Egyptian handmaid, and she becomes in a sense, a surrogate mother to bear a child that will be sort of legally Sarah's or Abraham's son and Sarai's child, but things get messy, and there's a lot of competition in that and all sorts of different things. And it shows that when we take things into our own hands, that when we don't trust God, when we don't give over God's plan, we don't give our plan into God's plan, then things get messy and things get broken. And that's where we need to pray also, I think especially for, just that deep, deep sorrow that couples might feel trying to conceive children. Trying to say, Lord, we want a child. And many times there's that temptation that can come there to say, we need to take it into our own hands. And that's why the church speaks about in vitro fertilization and surrogate motherhood and things like that, saying that actually is taking things into our own hands and not truly trusting God to be that ultimate author of the gift of life. And so it's a very real temptation. It comes from that area of, I desperately want a child. And yet we see from Abraham and Sarah that sense of, in a sense, struggling with trusting God and taking matters into their own hands. So now this is the God of the second chance. So this has happened. There is a child, Ishmael. And now Abraham, the Lord comes back to Abraham saying, I am the Lord God Almighty. Walk in my presence and be blameless. Because Abraham wasn't blameless for a little while. He lapsed in his faith. But God doesn't give up on him. And God says, trust me. And he renews this covenant saying, your wife will have this child. Trust me. And he even struggles with that. Can a child be born to a man who's 100 years old? He laughs to himself. And then he says, well, just let Ishmael live on by your favor. Bless him. And God says, I have this plan. And you need to trust that I will bring a son through your wife. Isaac is going to be his name because you laughed at me saying that I'm not capable of doing that. And I'm going to show you that with God, all things are possible. And the blessing is going to go through him to the nations. But I'm the author of life. And so anyone who has been created is in my image and likeness. And so Ishmael, even though he went through means that were not necessarily according to that original will, I'm still blessing him. I am still loving him. I will make him great and fertile. But we also see when we take matters into our own hands that the Lord blesses, but there can also be consequences and brokenness that comes forth. And we see that from the people of Ishmael come all of the Arab peoples, and from the people or from Isaac come all of the people of Jewish descent. And in many ways we see lived out in the Middle East that brokenness of two brothers that have still not been reconciled even to this day. And the reason why that feud is so bitter is because they're so close. They are in many ways so much alike. And sometimes that makes it harder to experience reconciliation and forgiveness. And so it starts from this moment of Abraham not trusting that God's way is always the best way. And so it's something for us to know that God is the God of second chances. He's the God of mercy. And there will be brokenness and woundedness that come forth from our actions, but God can still take that. God's plan is not over with that relationship of the people of Israel and the people of Arab descent. God can still bring ultimately, in the end, people to be reconciled and to come to him, to come to Jesus, ultimately through Mary. So let's ask the Lord for that grace to trust God's plan, to trust that God is not over with us, even if we find ourselves maybe broken from those consequences, taking matters into our own hands. God's will, his plan is not over. And let's trust him with that.